Okay, so we will just click ahead here and get to our fourth long-range cause, and that is this force of what was called militarism. Now, in some ways, militarism and industrialism go hand in hand, but this is definitely um, the stockpiling of weapons side of things was a militaristic action, and that was something that these European countries had begun to do, as I mentioned earlier. But militarism, there was also this, belief as well. There was a belief system in the time period, leading up to World War One, that if two countries, or if an individual had a problem with someone, there was only one way to work it out, and that was by fighting it out or going to war. So that was sort of the accepted belief in this time period. The act of what we call today diplomacy didn't really exist. It was kind of viewed as weakness. And diplomacy is this idea that, hey, we can talk out our problems here. We don't actually have to fight to determine, a winner and inevitable solution. All right, that was viewed, that wasn't even a thought in people's minds at this time. So militarism, this idea that, hey, listen, we got a problem with someone, we got to go and scrap it out here, and the winner gets to determine the outcome. So that exists among these European nations as well. So there is a willingness to fight. And because of that, you had to be ready to go. And most European countries, not most, all of them, had some form of a standing army, a regular force that, if need be, could be called into action right away. And that also meant that if you wanted to have a regular force, that you had to have people that could be trained, and that led to a policy of conscription that existed at this time period. And conscription is a term that we'll talk about in quite a bit of detail throughout this course. But conscription essentially is meaning when civilians are forced to enlist in the military, and it's a government policy. And throughout Europe at this time, that was commonplace. Now, maybe you might immediately think, geez, I wonder, does that exist in Canada? Well, not presently. Did it exist in this war? Well, we'll see, and it's going to be a matter of great controversy. All right, so here we have militarism. Now, one of the other great signs or symbols of militarism, or at least the threat of militarism, manifested or came to be in what was called a growing naval race. Now, this wasn't like countries sailing against each other. What we're talking about here is about shipbuilding, okay? Militarized warships. All right, and through this process of industrialization, ships became far more sophisticated by World War I standard. And they were massive ships that had great destructive power to them, and we can see that the idea of having a navy in an age of imperialism was pretty important. If you wanted to maintain an empire, you had to have ships that could defend countries that were, far away from you. So certainly, if we think about it in that context, well, who should have the largest navy? Well, the answer should be obvious. It would be Britain. If it has the largest empire, it should also have the largest navy. Well, Britain has always had a history here of priding itself in its naval supremacy. And Britain, leading up to World War One, did have the largest navy. In fact, it had a formula in place that would ensure that it would always have the largest navy, and it was called the two-power standard. Basically, this meant that England wanted its navy to be as large as both the second and third largest navies in the world combined. All right, so we can see that two-power standard by this graph is actually intact. So you can see Britain has 29 of these large naval vessels leading up to World War One. And that would mean that it would have more ships than both the second and third largest countries combined. So Germany has 17, France has 10, 27 is the math. Yes, they have two more ships than both number 2 and 3 combined. Now, Germany is the country that's really guilty here for instituting this naval race. All right, and the Kaiser wanted Germany to be this imperial force, this military might. And he realized that if they wanted to have an empire, they need to have ships. So Germany begins this shipbuilding process. Well, that is viewed directly as a threat to England because of the two-power standard, forces them to have to build ships. And as soon as they start building ships, everybody gets nervous and they start building ships, and so on and so forth. And we end up in this situation where we have this very concerned global world here worried about a naval race, which could lead to a war.